Moving on to the NBA playoffs, and those watching on my YouTube format, you'll see that I am donning my Miami Heat jersey. You can't see the number 3, but the legend himself, Dwayne Wade, as the Miami Heat are going into the playoffs this year as the number 1 seed, officially clinched the number 1 seed back on Thursday. Didn't even have to do anything. The Bucks beat, I think it was the 76ers, and jumped over them at the time for the second place spot. That officially clinched Miami in the number 1 seed. I did go to the game on Friday against the Atlanta Hawks, and Trae Young is just an absolute animal. He had 36 points. Someone so small, so quick. It's amazing what you can do now in the modern NBA with that sort of skill set. He's small, he's not really physical, but he led both teams in scoring and just had absolutely no help on the other side. Really, the only other person that can create a shot on Atlanta is Bogdan Bogdanovic. He did decently well, but if you're looking at Clint Capella, you're not going to get much from him. Pretty much all of Clint Capella's points were generated either off of Trae Young misses or him coming up and setting a screen. You got the double team hedge, and then Trae Young with this absolutely crafty pass down low. So Trae Young really deserves a lot of respect, and he plays his villain role so well. I remember in the playoffs last year, the Atlanta and New York series, I was rooting for New York, which is weird as a Heat fan. The two teams generally have a pretty nice competitiveness between the two. I don't want to call it a hatred, but there's definitely some bad blood when the two teams faced off often in the 90s. And you just have the two big market teams facing off against each other is always amazing to see. But Trae Young absolutely dominated the Knicks last year and really made himself a household name. He came on the scene, he became the villain. He accepted that role in MSG, bowing to the crowd, and I absolutely loved it. And I absolutely love what I see from him going on into the future. If you just look at that trade that the Mavericks and the Hawks made, Doncic, Trae Young, I think both teams are very happy with the outcome. But that being said, Miami did clinch the number 1 seed, and we'll have to wait to see who they end up playing in the first round. The play-in games are starting today, the first of which, I'll start with the Eastern side. I'm not going to go day by day. The Cavaliers are going to be playing the Nets today in the 7 versus 8 matchup. Tomorrow we will have the Hornets-Hawks game, and the winner of that game plays the loser tonight. We also have on the west side the Clippers versus the Timberwolves. The winner of that game moves on to play the number 2 seed Grizzlies. And then we have the Spurs-Pelicans. Winner of that game plays the loser of that game, of the game before it. If I'm looking at that, I can't pick against the Nets. The Nets have been on a tear. Getting Kyrie back has been huge for them. And as a Heat fan, I do not want any part of the Brooklyn Nets going into the playoffs. So with the Nets having to play the Boston Celtics, that's going to eliminate one of the 2 best teams in the East if you're Miami. And then you're looking at the other matchup, that would be between either the winner of the Hornets and the Hawks and the Cavs. If I'm looking at the Hornets-Hawks game, just looking at the Hawks on Friday night, looking at Trae Young, I do have a little bit of a bias. He was on fire. He was so electric. On top of the fact that I can never really buy into the Hornets as good as they are. They have LaMelo Ball. They have Miles Bridges. They've been balling this year. They're a great young bunch. They're really entertaining to watch, but I don't think they're going to be able to overcome the Hawks. And that puts together a 1-game playoff between the Cavaliers and the Hawks. And I sat here and tossed this back and forth for a while. I'm not really too hell-bent on saying this is for sure what's going to happen. But ultimately, I do believe the Cavaliers are going to win. Darius Garland has had a great season this year. Could be most improved player of the year. And I think that will eventually lead them to playing the Miami Heat in the first round. Now looking at the West, you have the Clippers-Timberwolves matchup going on tonight. The winner of that goes on to play the Grizzlies, like I said. I believe the Clippers are going to take it in this one. The Clippers, ever since getting Paul George back, have been absolutely on fire. Terrence Mann, you have the better Morris twin, as I like to call them. Norman Powell also just came back from injury. So the Clippers have been very different ever since getting Paul George back, getting Norman Powell back as well. And then you have the other game. You have the Spurs and the Pelicans. And the Pelicans, really, it's insane that the Pelicans have even got to this point in the first place. Zion Williamson hasn't played all season. Your best player, CJ McCollum, is somebody you traded for halfway through the year. Brandon Ingram has been injured all year. You don't really have a lot of talent on that team. And they've been able to make their way into the playoffs. However, I do think this is where it comes to an end. The Spurs, Greg Popovich, the experience alone, Yeah, they don't have a lot of talent, but I do believe the Spurs will get the better of the Pelicans, and then there'll be a face-off between the Timberwolves and the Spurs. And I'm sorry, Timberwolves are going to take that one. Greg Popovich can only do so much for the lack of talent that his team has. The Timberwolves have been really on fire this year. Karl-Anthony Towns had a great season. Anthony Edwards has had a great sophomore year, piggybacking off of his Rookie of the Year last year, and that will lead them to play the number 1 seed, the Suns. So, with those play-in games situated, that would have my first round look like the Heat versus the Cavs, the Celtics versus the Nets, the Bucks versus the Bulls, and the 76ers versus the Raptors over in the East. If I'm looking at that, starting off with the Heat versus the Cavaliers, the Miami Heat aren't going to drop a game against the Cavaliers. I'm sorry. Just kidding. I'm not sorry. The Miami Heat have been great all season long. They've had the number 1 seed now for a few months, not giving up to anybody in that time period. And the Cavaliers, they've had a great season. Nobody really expected them to make the playoffs. They've been adding young talent year after year now through the draft because they've had such good draft decisions. So eventually, you would think they would come through. They're very comparable to the Grizzlies, except the Grizzlies have done it better. They've gotten better players out of the draft, and deservedly so are the number 2 seed. But the Cavaliers don't have the firepower. They don't have the system that Miami does. Miami, top to bottom, is just one of the best organizations in basketball, one of the best coaching staffs. And then you have the firepower, of course, Jimmy Butler leading the way. Love his personality. Love the dog he brings to the team. Tyler Hero, 6th Man of the Year. Bam Adebayo, who did enter COVID protocols yesterday, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, whether he has COVID or he was in close contact. I'm not exactly sure, so we'll have to wait and see on his availability. And we saw just the other day Victor Oladipo dropping 40 points in a meaningless game and a loss to the Magic. But if you have him firing like we all know he can, on top of what Miami already has, I don't think there's any way that the Cavs even get a game out of that series. That leads us to Celtics and Nets, and that is really one of the best matchups that you could hope for in the first round. The Nets have had, let's face it, a disappointing season. Kyrie wasn't able to play because of the rules of New York City, which I think we all can agree are pretty ridiculous, how Kyrie could sit courtside without a mask on, but he can't play in the games. Finally, that's been lifted, and he is able to play in Brooklyn. So he comes back in time, just in time for the playoffs. It's unsure whether Ben Simmons is going to be available, not even in the first round, but in the playoffs at all if they make it out of the first round. It's a really weird situation with him. I don't know what he did to injure himself sitting on the bench and sitting at home in Philly, but he got hurt somehow and has not been available at all since being acquired by the 76ers, or from the 76ers to the Nets, rather. You know, the Celtics, who ever since the All-Star break have been on fire. Jason Tatum doing Jason Tatum things. They're starting to figure out the dynamic of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. That's something that I pointed out before that I am kind of concerned about for the Boston Celtics is they haven't been able to figure out how to get those two on the court together, how to get them to play together really well. But now in the second half of the season, you're seeing that, and they are a legitimate threat to win the championship, but you're going to have to get past the Nets. And honestly, I'm going to take the Nets. The Nets have Kyrie. The Nets have Kevin Durant. The Nets have been on fire since getting Kyrie back. And I cannot see the Nets not getting out of the first round. This is a team that was a championship hopeful the last 2 seasons and obviously didn't go that way. Last year, if Kevin Durant's shoe was just a size smaller, they might be the NBA champs instead of the Bucks. But now, this year, they're healthier than they were last year. They got rid of James Harden, but we all know what James Harden looks like in the playoffs, and we've seen what James Harden looks like ever since joining Philly. He went through a stretch where in 5 games he only hit 20 shots. I saw a funny stat that Klay Thompson missed 2 full seasons, only came in around the halfway point of this year, and already has more 40-point games than James Harden. We know James Harden game doesn't equate to the playoffs that well, and I looked at that trade as a victory for the Brooklyn Nets. I think they added defense. I think they added somebody who can facilitate where you really have 3 ball-dominant, 2 guards, 1 forward, Kevin Durant, James Harden, Kyrie Irving. There's only 1 basketball on the court, and nobody of those 3 is looking to pass first. When you have Ben Simmons out there, we know he's going to be pass first, sometimes to his own detriment. But the Nets have a different dynamic this year, And going against the Celtics, I have them just narrowly edging it out. Again, not too passionate about this one. I think they're going to get it in Game 7 in Boston. Seeing Kyrie win Game 7 in Boston would be great to see. But I do have the Nets taking that series. Following that, I have the Bucks and the Bulls. And the Bulls at one point were the number 2 seed in the East, were looking really hot. DeMar DeRozan was looking like an MVP candidate. Averaging 35 points in a game, 8-game span was absolutely outrageous. But since then, they've fallen off. They've dropped from the 2 seed to the 6 seed since the All-Star break. They've not been hitting like they have. Something I'd like to point out, ever since they've lost Lonzo Ball, they've really dropped off. They've lost a facilitator. They've lost a defender, more importantly to me. I was having a conversation 2 days ago about the value of LaMelo Ball and Lonzo Ball. And I think it's undeniable that LaMelo Ball is the better player. He can score in ways that Lonzo can't, and you're in an offensive league. That's what you need. But Lonzo brings defense, and he's been able to figure out his shot. He's a facilitator. He's 6'5", 6'6" as a point guard, and he's always going to have an opportunity to find a good team to want him. Like he found the Chicago Bulls this offseason, after they had a great offseason. LaMelo is not really going to have the chance to find another team unless he requests for a trade. So I think it's going to be hard to find the value for LaMelo because he's going to be playing for a team, which we see this year is the number 10 seed, just scraping in the play-in tournament. But as I was saying, the Bulls, ever since losing Lonzo, has just been completely different, and I don't think they're going to give too much of a fight to the Bucks. Giannis is doing Giannis things, nearly won the scoring title. Interesting to see how the supporting cast does around him, which has really been the story of every single year of Giannis' career. Last year in the finals, Chris Middleton was hitting, Holiday was hitting. They got that help off the bench. So it'll be interesting to see how much help they get beyond this series, but for this series, I do have the Bucks taking it in 5. And then the last one in the East, I don't want to cover for too long because, again, I don't think it's going to be too much of a crazy showing. I think the 76ers are going to handle the Raptors. Again, I'll give the Raptors a game. I'll give them in 5. And then if we look in the West, the first matchup being the Suns versus the Timberwolves. Timberwolves have had a great season. They have that young core that they've built around that it's taken forever to get right, and they've kind of got it right. They're in the playoffs, so there's worse places to be, especially if you are the Timberwolves, there's worse places to be. However, Suns are the Suns. They are the best team in the league. I think it's going to be a sweep, clean sweep, in 4. Then moving on to the Grizzlies-Clippers matchup, which I'm sure when Ryan gets brought on here in a few minutes that we'll discuss a little bit. This one I probably took the longest time pondering back and forth on who was going to win. I love what the Grizzlies have done. They have the young core, Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson, and company. And I think they've really done a great job to rally around when Andre Iguodala was traded to them, and he didn't want to play for him. He made it very adamant. And I think that really helped the team bond and come closer together. And in doing so, they've put together a really good young squad through the draft. Dillon Brooks, another great find in the second round. He's playing key minutes for the team, getting buckets. And the Grizzlies are a very tough young team. But if you look on the other side, you have the Clippers. And they got Paul George back. They got Norman Powell back. They have Marcus Morris. They have Terrence Mann. They have a really good squad out there. And ever since getting Paul George back, this team has been completely different over the last month. If given a little bit more time, I would have expected them to jump over the Nuggets at the 6th seed, who are really injured and beat up and just crawling their way into the playoffs. So after a lot of consideration, I'm going to go with the Grizzlies in 7. It's difficult for me to say that as Ryan is celebrating there over in the other room. We'll talk about it in a second because, again, I'm not too for sure on that. It could go either way. And I originally really wanted to say the Clippers would win this, but I am going to go Grizzlies in 7. Ja Morant, we saw it last year. They got their way in the play-in tournament, beating the Warriors, and then they won their first-round matchup, which was completely took the league by surprise. And this year, I think, again, they're going to move on to the second round to play the Golden State Warriors, which would be a great rematch of last year's play-in tournament. The Warriors matching up against the Denver Nuggets. Denver Nuggets are going to be missing Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr. You have what's probably going to be the MVP in Nikola Jokic. However, the Warriors should be getting Steph Curry back at some point in the series. Not exactly sure when that is going to be, but you get Steph back, you have Jordan Poole, who very big argument to be made for most improved player of the year, and Klay Thompson. He's started to come to fire ever since coming back from that injury, which we saw him miss 2 full seasons with. Well, actually 2 different injuries, which we saw him miss 2 full seasons with. Warriors, they've been there before. Draymond Green also coming back. They know how to win. They have the most important guys on their team, all drafted in: Steph, Klay, Dre. When Steph comes back, having all 3 of those guys on the court versus the Nuggets, who have been really beat up, I think it'll take it to 6. I don't think the Nuggets are just going to lay on their back and take it, but it is ultimately going to result in a Warriors victory. And then the last series out west, the Mavericks and the Jazz. Another one that I was going back and forth on a little bit. The Jazz missing Bojan Bogdanovic. They traded Joe Ingles, and they're really relying on a tandem that doesn't really enjoy each other. Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert have seemingly been bumping heads since all the way back to really when Gobert gave Mitchell COVID 2 years ago, which seems like a lifetime ago now. Those two really haven't worked well together. You've seen Donovan Mitchell take some shots at Rudy Gobert in the media, and I think it's another season of disappointment for the Utah Jazz. Donovan Mitchell is a fantastic ball player and deserves the help that he, quite frankly, isn't getting. And I think it is going to be too much for them, and they will lose in 6 games to Luka Doncic and the Dallas Mavericks. So that's going to put a second-round matchups of Miami Heat and the 76ers, Nets and the Bucks, Suns and the Mavericks, and the Warriors and Grizzlies. All 4 of those matchups we'd be super excited for. Out of the bunch, the ones I'm probably most excited for is the rematch of the Nets and the Bucks last season. Like I said, Kevin Durant, his toe on the line. It's a 2-pointer instead of a 3-pointer. Changes the series, changes what would eventually be the NBA Finals. And I'm really excited for that, really excited for the entirety of the NBA playoffs.